I'm Ginger Campbell, and I'm an out boss.
Hello, Out Bosses. Rhodes Perry here, and welcome to this week's episode of The Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses crushing it in business. On today's episode, I am thrilled to be interviewing Dr. Ginger Campbell. Dr. Ginger Campbell, for those who are not familiar, is a seasoned physician with over 30 years of experience. And in 2006, she launched the highly respected podcast Brain Science, which has enjoyed over 10 million downloads with a diverse worldwide audience. Brain Science explores how recent discoveries in neuroscience are unraveling the mystery of how our brain makes us human. Dr. Campbell also hosts the powerful podcast, Graying Rainbows, coming out LGBTQ+ later in life. On today's show, we'll talk about the business of podcasting and Dr. Campbell's upcoming release of Are You Sure? The Unconscious Origins of Certainty, now soon to be in its second edition. So welcome to the show. I think this is our first time talking, right?
Officially, yes. Although you helped me launch Graying Rainbows.
Yeah, I love that. I love that show so much. And we're gonna talk a little bit about that more towards the end of the interview. I wanted to first open up and talk with you about Brain Science. I mean, this podcast you started in 2006 has over 10 million downloads. I mean, that's huge. That is so huge. So, I mean, you're a busy doctor. How in the world did you get started in the world of podcasting? And when you got started, did you ever imagine you would have 10 million downloads?
Well, the way I got started was that in 2005, podcasting appeared in iTunes in July of 2005. And the first time I heard a podcast, I was like, I want to do that. I don't know if you've ever felt that way, but it was just like, this is it. But it took me a year to come up with an idea because I didn't want, well, first of all, I did that usual recorded my voice, hated it thing. But also I just didn't want it to be like work. So I didn't want to do a show about medicine. And so, like I said, it took me a while. Happened to just be reading a lot of neuroscience. I'm a person who just loves to read nonfiction. And that was what I was exploring at the time. And I had an opportunity to be on somebody else's podcast doing a very short book review. And when I did it, I just got jazzed. You know how you feel just really the adrenaline rush of doing podcasting? Mm-hmm. And I was like, this is it, because I'll never run out of material. And this was 2006, before neuroscience was as hot as it is now. But I just felt like I won't run out of material. And the other issue is that the coverage of science in the mainstream media is so horrible. And I just wanted to, bring accurate information and make it comprehensible to a person without a science background.
And thank you. I agree with you. Podcasting it's so fun, right? It's fun because you're having these kind of conversations. You're learning from really interesting people from all walks of life, and you're able to share those insights that you gain from the conversation with your audience. And, you have 10 million downloads, right? So I'm curious, do you know much about the audience? Over time, have you been able to kind of glean a little bit of feedback? Because sometimes the other thing about podcasting is that sometimes it feels like you're having these conversations, you're seeing the downloads, and the feedback, I mean, you're not getting 10 million individual emails talking about it. So,
no,
yeah.
But I've gotten lots of feedback. I have a really good handle on my demographics from a combination of sources. One is just doing those typical audience surveys, that people want you to do for advertising. But I have more information just from so many years of email feedback. So I know that 75% of my audience has a college education. 20% of them are PhDs or MDs. But I know from my listener feedback that I also have plenty of listeners with no science background. I've gotten emails from a house painter, a tattoo artist, a plumber. And the thing that really surprised me that I didn't anticipate was how many students listen to the show. Recently, I've been working with a young man who just started his residency in psychiatry, sort of as a mentor, and he has been listening since he was in high school. So that's pretty exciting. So
he's grown up with your show as your show has grown up. That's really cool.
And I got another email just yesterday from somebody who told me they'd been listening for 10 years.
Oh,
so
wow.
that's pretty exciting too. But they come from a wide variety of backgrounds. The other subset that really surprises me is the people who have mental health challenges, or they're taking care of family members with things like Alzheimer's disease. My show is not really medically oriented, so I rarely talk about those subjects, but they still, just understanding more about how the brain works is empowering to people. And I never anticipated that impact. Rhodes, to be honest with you, I've discovered, and I've probably figured this out 10 years ago, that my show has more impact than I do in my individual practice as a physician, because I can touch so many more people.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, think about that. I mean, that's just the magic of the idea that you had, the idea that lit you up, and the confidence of just hitting record and then publish, right? And I mean, that's incredible. The topic that you're speaking on too, I mean, we all have brains, right? We want to understand how they work. We want to make them work better, right? So it makes sense that people have found your show and continue to receive so much value from it. I feel like when I think of the podcast world, there is that kind of first generation of podcaster, and I very much see you in that kind of first wave. So from getting started in the early aughts, or I guess the mid aughts, right, up until today, 14 years of continually, creating this content. What's changed for you? What surprised you about where this movement is at now? And if you want to do a little forecasting, what do you think the next 14 years will be like?
Well, from the standpoint of a podcaster, the tools have, gotten so much better. It's so much easier to podcast. I mean, when I started, I had to do my own audio editing. I spent 6 months before I launched just figuring out, how I was going to do my website and all that kind of stuff. And now, you can pay somebody to do all that stuff for you. The only thing I currently outsource is audio editing, which I started doing 3 or 4 years ago, and that's a lifesaver. I wouldn't be able to do multiple shows without that. And tools to allow your listeners to support your work are so much better. I have a premium subscription system where people can pay a very small amount a month and get access to way back in my catalog. And then, of course, there's Patreon, which almost everybody is using now. But it's easier, to at least break even if you don't have advertising. Trends that are annoying, NPR claiming they invented podcasting when they just repurposed their radio shows and call them podcasts. Very annoying. The New York City people acting like they're the whole podcasting world.
Yeah.
And then your show accepted the dominance of business podcasts. Those trends are a little bit disturbing to those of us who are producing sort of non-commercial content.
Yeah.
I mean, people are acting like audio fiction is new. The very first podcasters were two types, and this is before me, the couple years before me, because podcasting really started in 2004. The earliest podcasters were fiction people like Scott Sigler and the tech guys, the guys doing the tech shows.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen in the next 14 years. I'm hoping that it doesn't go the way of radio, which is, when the big guys take over and the little guys don't have a chance. I'm hoping that will be prevented just by the nature of the internet. But who knows? It's hard to tell.
Yeah, that's the piece that I really enjoy about this, and even some of the bigger radio personalities admit how much they enjoy podcasting, because restrictions on, what they would like to say, they're not as bound, right? And I guess that part of that is with FCC regulation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not one to drop the F-bomb, but I mean, if you wanted to, you could, and we just kind of rate this episode as a little E after it, but it's, but beyond that, just kind of being able to really exercise your free speech and sharing what you have to add value to the world is really powerful, and it's freeing, and it's certainly a creative outlet. So, I wanted to open up with just kind of acknowledging your seasoned expertise in this world, and also just, recognizing that this is a business podcast and it's kind of business meaning culture. What do you think the benefit for listeners who haven't thought about podcasting could be for them? As you said, you've had way more impact on, the world through your show Brain Science than compared to 30 years serving as a physician, right? So yeah, I mean, your thoughts on that one?
Well, if I was talking to a business person, I would say, right now the fad is, every business should have a podcast as a way of making a funnel of getting customers. And I think that can be a little short-sighted because, how many more business podcasts do we need? But for example, your show is a very important niche podcast. So that's, fine. But, how many podcasts do we need about, how to drive sales? I don't know. On the other hand, I would guess that almost every single person out there has some other passion besides their business, or wishes that they did. You could make a show about something that has nothing to do with your business, maybe just as a creative outlet. And if it finally does get you some business, that's okay too. I would just argue that not every podcast needs to be a funnel to making money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because, this show in particular, when I had the idea to create it, it was recognizing I'm getting started in business and I have like minimal experience with a lot of the elements that are needed to build out a really successful business. And so I thought, all right, I need some mentors, and I would really love some LGBT mentors. And hey, I really like this idea of podcasting. Let's see how it goes. And it's been so amazing. And at times I'm thinking, this isn't necessarily what I do in my business. Should I shift it? And, those times that I think about that, that's when I get feedback from listeners where it's like, this is amazing. I'm thinking about starting my own business and this is saving me years. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that advice on, find something that lights you up, that could help you. It could serve other people. It's a creative passion, because at the end of the day, it's a lot of work. And the fact that you have 3 shows,
it's a lot of work.
I really commend you for being able to continue practicing medicine, getting amazing guests, not just for Brain Science, but for 2 other shows. I mean, kudos to you. So we can talk about how you manage your day a little bit later, but I do want to pivot and give you the opportunity to talk a little bit more about your book. And so for folks who aren't familiar, you have a book out called Are You Sure? The Unconscious Origins of Certainty. And that was first published in 2012. You are working with friend of the show, Jen T. Grace, who is the founder of Publish Your Purpose Press. And you're now putting out a second edition. So walk us through your thinking, of one, you want to put out another edition of the book. Like, why are you choosing to do it now? I could guess, but I would love to hear from you.
Is it okay if I back up just a little bit?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So I know we're going to talk about Grain Rainbows in a little while, but Grain Rainbows launched in November of 2018. And it was because you told me about creating change that I met Jen Grace in January of last year. But during 2019, I was very focused on doing coaching training. I actually thought that maybe because I was trying to figure out how to grow Grain Rainbows and to meet the needs of the community. And so I thought, well, maybe I will become a coach. And I actually did the entire coach training. But about halfway through, I realized that I didn't want to be a coach. Mm-hmm. And part of coach training is you sort of coach each other. And so one of the things I learned was that my primary value is not what I have told myself it was for nearly 50 years. I've always thought that my primary value was helping others. And I discovered that my primary value is actually being able to express my creativity. And this was a big deal for me because it explains why podcasting is so rewarding and why medicine is so frustrating, because there's not much room for creativity in medicine. So I realized, no, becoming a coach is not the path. And creativity. So I realized that what I really wanted to do was to start reinvesting more energy into brain science. I mean, it's been going on a long time, so it's kind of a little bit on autopilot. So I got to thinking, well, how can I take brain science to the next level? Well, I've got to reach people who don't listen to podcasts. That's where the book part comes in. So because I had already published Are You Sure? Way back in 2012, at that time, KDP on Amazon was just starting. And when I published it, it was just on Amazon. The only other place I sold it was on my own website as a PDF. So having met Jen, I decided, well, I'm gonna expand this book and make it nice and have a paperback. And so that's what I'm working on. Really, what I wanted to do was, to be honest, I wanted to kind of do a trial run so I could figure out some of the logistics, because I want to write something longer over in the next year or so. And working with Jen, I realized that I sort of undervalued the work I'd already done on this book. I didn't realize how short books have gotten. I mean, every day I get books from academic publishers that are usually like 400 pages long. Mm-hmm. So, that's my idea of how long a book's supposed to be. And I didn't realize, well, you can write a book and it can be 130 pages and it's okay. Mm-hmm. And so working with Jen, I realized that what I really should do is go ahead and go full out on promoting Are You Sure? And as far as the timing of the topic, I would have to say that that's luck. Because, I mean, when I planned, in fact, I originally was going to release it on April 28th and had to push it back because of all the delays in COVID, right? Mm-hmm. So I didn't know we were going to be entering this in time of extreme uncertainty. Now that was just, I'm not sure if that's going to turn out to be a plus or a minus from the standpoint of attracting readers. Time will tell.
Oh, I think this book, I mean, you gave me an advanced copy of the revision or the second edition, and it is so needed. I mean, the conversations we've been having on this show for the past couple of months now they're all centered around uncertainty. And so I think that this resource is so valuable. And you had the idea of revising it, putting it back out into the world, and we get a little woo on this show. So, I mean, it's the universe is conspiring to make sure that more people get exposed to your brilliance and the value that you're adding. And I just want to back up a little bit, because when you were talking about your coaching program, two really valuable things came out of that. One, you gained more clarity about what you don't want to be doing in the world, both coaching, and I guess two is then kind of getting more clear on your purpose, right? Your purpose is the artistic expression. That's what lights you up, truly, as opposed to what you thought you've been telling yourself about helping others. And I would say, by expressing yourself, you're sharing, through the content you're creating on your podcast and your books, a message that is your artistic expression, and it resonates, it resonates with your audience. And that is a service, in my opinion. I think you're still helping people, kind of like it's circular, but it's starting with getting clear on the why. And for you, it's just you want the fullest expression of who you are, and it's done through your work, which is a form of art, So anyway, that's my little takeaway from that. So on this other piece, I certainly mention Publish Your Purpose Press a lot because I love Jen and I worked with her on my own book. So for you, the decision to work with her, so you met her at Creating Change. What about this kind of hybrid publishing model appealed to you that might be different than going alone or maybe with an academic publisher? What about this particular method of getting your book out worked for you?
Well, anyone who's met Jen knows that, she knows her stuff. And also, I was very impressed with, the way you launched your book. And I know that you followed her guidance. I also met Mark David Gibson at Creating Change.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's great.
So I really, I wanted to work with her, as a part of, really becoming part of the community, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the hybrid model, the world is changing so fast. I was talking to a friend today who is traditionally published. Actually yesterday, a neuroscientist who's traditionally published and has a textbook coming out next month. And I was talking to him about, the pros and cons. I'm actually working with an academic publisher about possibly doing an academic title in the future, just because, in my field, that does have a certain prestige to it. And I'm going to work with him to figure out whether any of my ideas are really appropriate for an academic publisher. But the reality is, if you publish with an academic publisher, you aren't going to make any money. And that's fine if your goal is to get tenure because you wrote this book on your sabbatical, which I assume is what a lot of professors do. But, I'm not going to get that. In fact, Jen and I are going to be working on just, sorting out that whole trade-off between having control over your publication versus any limited benefits of going with a traditional publisher. Mm-hmm. So I think, there's no one size fits all anymore. But the great thing is we have these options.
Yes.
And we have people like Jen out there that can help us to get our stories out into the world and in whatever form they are. I've had several great guests on Grain Rainbows that I'm trying to encourage to work with Jen because their stories are so powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, and it's always surprising to me, the academic press, right? And it makes total sense. I have a number of friends who are in the field, they're professors, and they're constantly, they've got the pressure of constantly doing their own content creation, of putting out articles that are peer reviewed in their books. And it's just so surprising that the prestige that comes with that kind of publishing, just what is lost in terms of there's no sharing of that pie at all, and again, you're right. Like if your goal is to get tenured and to get that exposure in your field, then that's your motivation. It's still, I think, as someone who's not in that world, it just feels very inequitable. Like so much of your brilliance is being put out there and it's making
but one of the things you have to realize is that the academic presses, I'm not talking about the big publishing houses. I'm talking about the academic presses that are under the wings of various universities.
Yeah.
They are operating on minuscule margins. It's not like they're making a bunch of money that they aren't sharing with the authors. That's not the case. Most of the academic titles, their chief sales are probably going to go to libraries. They don't make big bucks. It's not like, I really don't think that they're exploiting. They give royalties. It's just that the odds of you actually making your advance back are almost zero.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality. I worry that the academic publishers will die, and we need them because the kind of books they publish, I rely on them for content for my show because it's been a long time since I wanted to do general audience books just because I would be bored if I was still doing those.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that additional insight is actually really helpful. So let's keep picking up your academic textbooks, because we actually need, the peer reviewed, like the rigor that goes into, I mean, just an article that's getting published in a journal, let alone an entire book, is important for sure. And, I mean, definitely depending who you work with, a publisher, Purpose Press, definitely uses that kind of peer review model. Is not necessarily all done within the academy, for sure. So
when I was getting my book edited with Jen, the person who did it pointed out to me the places where I had failed to cite or quote correctly, because I was working off of transcripts. And, when you're talking, you don't cite in the same way as you do when you're writing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great point. I mean, even if you're thinking about a keynote talk, you're giving the talk, and then if people have questions, you have, a PDF of the kind of the works that you use to inform the talk, but you're not going to necessarily share that when you're speaking it out, and for sure when you're recording as well. This is really helpful, because I do know that there's so many folks in the audience. I mean, everybody, as Jen says, everybody has a story, right? In thinking about what your expertise is, what kind of value you want to bring into the world. A book, a podcast, your own blog, there's lots of ways of expressing yourself artistically, and that by doing that absolutely helps people. They'll find your message. Those folks that want to resonate with it, they will find you. And it's pretty cool when that happens, for sure. When you first put the book out, did you have that experience with people, especially like with your large audience on brain science? And did you get that kind of feedback where you're like, whoa, I didn't even realize this book had that impact on this aspect that I wasn't aware of it when I wrote it?
Well, to be honest with you, the first edition, I did not promote at all. Zilch. Yeah. I was just doing an experiment. I was actually helping somebody who was trying to build a course for how to do online publishing. Like I said, Amazon KDP was just getting started, and I was just basically a beta student. Yeah. And so the first edition was really kind of just thrown out there, and it happened at a time when I was really busy with other things. And I put it out there, and it did okay, but I did zero promotion. So I really didn't get much feedback, which is what I deserve, because I did zero promotion.
Yeah. I mean, the promotion piece it's one of those things, like, as an author, you're so focused in on the content, the quality of the content. Are you making the argument? Are you, delivering on the promise of the book, that like the last thing on your mind is like, okay, there's like a whole other book that is the book of promoting. And I think, again, that's what really impressed me with working with a publishing house like Jen's, like Publisher Purpose Press, because she breaks that down. I think she has one of those social media quotes of like, if you write a book and nobody knows about it, did you really write the book, or something like that? Like, it's just, you want people to get to it. And I think the thing that's different about working with like a hybrid publisher versus like a big, Random House, Penguin, whatever, is that you're going to get that coaching on the marketing side in a way that, in theory, you would expect. If a book publisher gives you an advance, they're going to go out there and go to bat for you to make sure that everyone knows about it. And I think unless you're like a Michelle Obama, they're not going to promote it in the way that you want it to be promoted.
Yeah. The irony is they promote the books that actually probably don't need promoting.
Yeah, exactly. The amount of attention that you would receive at that, at where you're at, unless you're a celebrity status, is maybe not quite that you would do yourself, right? And so I think, like, if you've got that support on how to market, it makes it so much easier. And it's so like you were saying about tools that are available for podcasting, similar tools are available for books, whether you're hybrid publishing, self-publishing, to really get it out there. It's just, you've got to make that commitment early on. And it'll be really interesting to see, if we get you back on the show, 6 months, a year from now, how just doing the second edition and doing that promotion, what will change for you? And I think, in this moment in time, the book itself, the title, I wouldn't be surprised to see you on different media outlets where people are wanting to chat with you in the middle of an election season too. So, it's smart, it's good timing, and you're working with the right people that are gonna, they'll kind of flag, hey, have you thought about this or this? I found there's so many places to promote that it's sometimes, prioritizing, making the decisions of like, okay, this is what I can do for now, and this would be nice to have a couple of months from now and then later on down the road. So really, I'm just excited for you. I'm excited that this is going to get back out there in a different way. Yeah, I think that things will definitely change for you in really positive ways. I do want to talk about Grain Rainbows because this is the Out Entrepreneur and this is what we love. I think it's such an important podcast because I think our history is it's rich and it's long, and we don't know enough about LGBTQ origins and how things have shifted over time. So talk to me a little bit more about what you're learning from the show, just simply by hosting it.
Well, first, let me just tell you a little bit about how the show has evolved. You probably know that the very first episode had historian Lillian Faderman as a guest. And she also came back and talked about her recent biography of Harvey Milk. So those were episodes very strong on LGBT history. I've also had Gary Marcus from Making Gay History and Deb Fowler from History Unerased. She works on creating educational materials on gay history for schools. So early on, I had a big focus on history and also making people aware of elder issues. And those have been great. But what I have sort of evolved toward is having listeners share their stories, because I've discovered that seems to be the thing that really resonates with the people who are coming to the show who are struggling with coming out, which is the audience I was trying to reach. In fact, I recently had to move my private Facebook group off of Facebook to MeWe just for privacy concerns, because I have a segment of listeners who are still not out, and they are very worried about being outed before they're ready.
Yeah.
So I've also learned, I think, as much from their stories. For one thing, I've learned that the way people deal with coming out later in life is as varied as the people. It has surprised me the number of stories of people who have been in long-term relationships and come out to their spouse, after like 30 years. They don't necessarily break up. Your intuition is that the only solution is we go our separate ways. But that actually isn't what everybody does.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've had some great people tell me their stories from various religious backgrounds, like Orthodox Judaism, which I knew nothing about, and the courage of the people coming out of those is amazing. And the feedback I've gotten, I mean, my audience is still pretty small, but the feedback I've gotten has been very powerful. I know that the show is reaching people who need the show. Mm-hmm. And that's what really matters. I mean, early on, I was discouraged by the numbers because I'm kind of spoiled, because Brain Science has, top 5 percentile numbers. And so I'm very spoiled. And I had to come to accept that I'm going to have to let Grain Rainbows grow organically, because I don't have the bandwidth to work on promoting it.
Yeah. And I think the people, like you said, the people who need it find it. And it's something that I think organically it will change over time. It's one of those shows that I think if you did 100 episodes and left it to live wherever podcasts can be consumed, I think it would be a resource that would be referred to again and again, just because of what you're able to create as an archive that is so powerful, which is our history. And the fact that the show is out there, that's a part of the history. And just like your insights of what you're learning about just the nature of coming out, the fact that it is super different from person to person, and the challenges of coming out when you're reconciling deep beliefs in your faith community, and kind of the risk that takes just to live in your truth, and what potentially can be lost is also really valuable. And the struggles that might be different for folks that are a part of the gray and rainbow community versus younger folks. And for younger folks to hear, directly from elders, what the world was like, 50 years ago or longer. And I think it builds bridges, right? And it helps us have a little more grace with each other within our really multicultural, multi-generational movement that's, trying to create a better world. Like on the topic of books and writing, do you see yourself ever writing a book based on what you're learning from the show?
Yeah, I think it's going to happen eventually because, I've already got some of the most incredible stories. Mm-hmm. I don't, it's not on my short-term horizon because I'm focused on, I have, 14 years of content that I really want to condense into about 3 books at least. And so until I finish, that's kind of my, my burning thing. But it may be that at some point, I reach a critical mass where I say, okay, now it's time to write this. Or it may be that somebody comes to me and says, it's time to write this. Please do it. Who knows? It's hard to know. One thing I'd like to mention, Rhodes, is that has when you make a podcast, you always think you know who your listener is, but you're usually wrong. Okay. Like I imagine my listener would be like this NPR person, and it's actually much more diverse. I'm talking about brain science. It's actually much more diverse than I expected. And I never expected the large number of students. For this show, I have been, Grain Rainbows, I've been surprised by the number of young people that write to me. And also, I get a lot of emails from people who've been out a long time. And it doesn't matter. They still enjoy the content. Mm-hmm. And that means a lot to me. So even though the show was aimed at and still trying to figure out how to reach an older audience, it's, anyone can enjoy it. I think the thing that a younger person could really learn is, like you mentioned, how things were different. And I am starting to ask my older guests, as I'm getting truly older guests on, to tell, what year was that, to give people some perspective of, that was a time when everyone was in the closet, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So that they can have some historical perspective. Because a lot of people, in their 60s and 70s and above, the reason that they are coming out later in life is because the opportunity didn't really exist for them when they were young. Mm-hmm. And then, you get committed to a relationship. A lot of people do. What I did, which was, I didn't come out till my husband died. Mm-hmm. And that's not an unusual thing for a person who's been in a long-term committed relationship to do. And I think that's probably hard for a young person to necessarily appreciate.
Yeah. And I think the fact that you're collecting those stories, it again, I think it's direct connection. That's the power of storytelling, is as soon as you share a story, I can find a way to connect to it and have some additional grace, some empathy, and understanding your experience, even if I could never, have that experience myself, and vice versa. So I think that's really powerful. And I love that you're asking your guests to identify the year that things happen. And if he hasn't been on your show yet, you had mentioned him earlier, Mark Gibson. He was on this program a while back, and we talked about his experiences in the military. And he was in the military in the 80s. And so this is pre Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I think what people, it's just, people, it really contextualized what that climate was like, which was not a good climate, right? And Don't Ask, Don't Tell complicated things where it was meant to, I guess, be better. And that made it harder in different ways. So it was helpful for him to kind of share that history real time for folks for a younger generation that just didn't have to live through it. So, I mean, there's so much value in the program that you're creating and continuing to build. So I hope in the long-term horizon that there's a longer form for people that don't necessarily consume podcasts, because I do think that will help tremendously and add to, what your early guests were able to share in their work as historians, right? Are just these kind of primary sources. So super powerful. One last question for you. And this is more about, so last week I had, it was so amazing. So I watched the Equality Florida, Nadine Smith, who's the executive director there, assembled a convening of 4 nationally recognized Black LGBT leaders and kind of talking about this moment that we're in Pride, recognizing the demands for justice for the police murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. Well, that was a community murder, but just the violence towards Black Americans. And it was really interesting to hear Alfonso David, who's the president of the HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, share the statement of kind of talking about the moment that we're in right now and recognizing that our history, kind of looking at Stonewall in particular, of the leaders at that point of largely trans women of color, Black, Latinx, and how Stonewall was a series of riots over a period of days. And so what he was saying was the charge of like, let's, as LGBTQ folks, honor our history so that it can help us shape our future, help us create a future of a better world. And I don't know. I mean, when I heard that, I mean, I thought I loved it. And then recognizing the show that you have, Graying Rainbows, I'm just wondering, how does your show help your listeners remember our history to inspire us to dream about a better future than perhaps where we're at in this moment?
I'm not sure, Rhodes. I mean, sometimes I worry that young people don't realize how fragile the rights we have are, how easily they could be taken away. I mean, the Lavender Scare during McCarthyism was partly generated by an executive order from President Eisenhower banning gay people from federal employment. That's all it took. And, our current president certainly would have no qualms of doing a similar thing. I mean, to be honest, I find myself, I was thinking about this morning too, because I'm getting ready to do a virtual online thing in a couple of weeks because it's, nothing's live right now. I find myself torn with a tension between hope and despair. Hope that this is a turning point in the right direction versus despair that we're heading, toward the end of our democracy. I mean, I was talking to a friend who I actually hadn't even told her I was gay before, but I did during the conversation. She was talking about, she had just seen the footage, and this was a white woman who had just seen the footage of George Floyd's murder, and she was, galvanized by it. But then she also said, yes, I identify as a conservative Christian because I don't believe in abortion. And I said to her, so are you telling me that you would be on this one issue do you want me to be a second-class citizen? I explained to her about the case before the Supreme Court. And I said, do you think I should be a second-class citizen? And, of course she said no, but I don't know what she really thought. But I think that maybe at least it gave her a different perspective because she was totally blind to all the stuff that we're worried about, right? Because it doesn't affect her.
Yep.
But a lot of young people don't seem to realize that, I mean, we're a hairbreadth away from losing everything that we've gained since Stonewall.
Yes. Yeah, I'm there with you. And I'm thank you for sharing that story because, it's got me thinking about a number of things. I don't know if you've seen the Netflix series, Mrs. America. If you haven't, it's really good. Oh, it's on Amazon Prime. Sorry. It's about the Equal Rights Amendment and kind of the movement that was happening.
Yeah, it's about Phyllis Schlafly. Well, see, I
yes.
lived through those times, and I remember hating Phyllis Schlafly in the real time. So
okay, so we don't have to traumatize you again. So for anyone who's not familiar with that, I think that speaks to kind of what you're saying, because at that moment, she had her. So she was basically opposed to the Equal Rights Amendment and organized many, many women about defending traditional femininity and gender roles and kind of.
And somehow it got back down to bathrooms too. I mean, she actually said, if the Equal Rights Amendment passes, we'll have to use the same bathroom. She really did use that argument.
Oh, yeah. Bathrooms have been, from, just segregation and Jim Crow up until trans folks, right? And kind of, it's intense, right? And it's, anyway, at the end of the show, the Equal Rights Amendment doesn't pass. And some of the elected, the few women that were elected in the House of Representatives were kind of just lamenting, like Reagan had just won and was like, okay, so for the past 50 years, going back to the New Deal, right? Like all of our work is now, just vulnerable of being turned back. And so it feels like we're here in this moment in a similar way. And what I'm hopeful about is that just seeing, the protests that are happening here in Portland. My town that I grew up in, teeny tiny Palm Bay, Florida, has had peaceful demonstrations there. People are activated. So like what you're saying, it's so the fragility of our rights. You're right. Like if we are passive and complicit in what's happening, they're going to go away. So how important are they to you? And I think for so many folks who listen to this show, you are business owners. You have, even if you feel like you don't have power and influence, you do. You're serving an audience. And so this is your moment. If you don't like what's happening, activate whatever that looks like to you. And if you're not sure where to start, email me. I have lots of ideas. I'm there with you. And I think what gives me hope too, Ginger, is that you're doing the work that you continue to do. I think the book that you have coming out is going to be super helpful about this idea of certainty and how our brains work and, how maybe we think that what we know about them, maybe we don't know. So if anyone who's tuning in is curious about that, and I hope everyone is, because that helps in all walks of life, then I encourage you to check out Ginger's book. So before we go, can you let us know where, like what the plan is? When can we order it? Where can we find it? All that good stuff.
So you can buy it wherever you want. It is available on all the major online platforms. And what I would say to you is if you buy it and you send me a screenshot of your receipt, grayingrainbows@gmail.com, I will send you a gift card for Amazon. Of course, you don't have to do that if you don't want a gift card, but I know that you like to have specials on here, and I don't have any coupon codes or anything, so it's just easier for me to do that. But anywhere you want, including it's going to be on my website, brainsciencepodcast.com.
Nice. Well, that is amazing. And thank you. Thank you for that gift. And for our audience members, definitely check it out. It's going to help you. And, let's support a member of our community. And so we will show up for you for sure. Thank you for being on the show. This has been a great interview. I'm excited. Let's make a plan to bring you back in like 6 months or a year, because I want to hear how the book has impacted what you do in the world, because I think it will. I really do. I think people are going to find it, and I think it's going to be very well received. So kudos to you for the second edition, and for 3 podcasts, and for doing the work that you do in the world and through medicine and all the other stuff. You're definitely a busy person, and you're doing good work. So thank you.
Thank you, Rose. I appreciate your feedback, because really you're like the first person to read it that's not part of my core audience. And so it's really valuable to me to have your feedback.
Yeah, well, thank you. I did the scan, and I'm excited to get a copy, because I love the feel of a book, and I like to think of it as like a good movie that goes much slower. So anyway, like thank you again. I really appreciate it. And for all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in this week. We will be back next Tuesday, same time, same place. What I'm asking you to do for now is to show up as authentically as you want in your work, in the world, and keep building a better world. And I'll see you next week.